So, hi everyone, and thank you very much for watching or listening. Liam Hartery back with you today with episode 446, I think, as long as I haven't lost count there, of the Simply Inspired podcast. And today I'm joined by a very special guest, and I'm very honored, I'm feeling very blessed to welcome to today's episode Teresa Ranieri. Hopefully, I'm saying that the right way with my Welsh accent there. And this lovely lady does some incredible work healing and educating, inspiring, teaching. I'm not sure how you define that, Teresa, but we will come back to that topic very shortly. But mindfulness teacher with a master's degree in mindfulness based interventions. Teresa has been involved in mindfulness for over 35 years and has an extensive background as a dancer and a choreographer to a very high level and a very well respected level. Now, today we're going to be talking about not only mindfulness itself, because that's one piece of the puzzle, but really we're going to be finding out more about Teresa's own story and some of the methodology that she has learned to reduce suffering and teach many other people to do so. As I always say with my talks, I'm not here advocating a particular path. You have to follow this path, you have to follow that path. What I hope, though, is that if you are suffering or if someone you know is suffering, then there will be some deeper understanding here at the very least that you can start to change that. So stay tuned, everyone. And Teresa, thank you so much for making the time for this. And I know I said that before we started recording, but I appreciate it so much. And I appreciate you bearing with me for the time that it's taken to get this together. It's a joy to finally be here with you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Liam, and thank you for doing this, preparing these interviews and helping people to find somehow their way back to balance, into balance. Yeah, thank you for inviting me and being part of your incredible journey. 446 interviews. This is something. Thank you for doing this in the world and bringing some light where is very much needed, in fact.
It's my pleasure, and it sounds like a lot, doesn't it? But the interviews have evolved as I have done my best to evolve. But it's wonderful to be here. Now, one of the topics we were talking about just now, actually, which I think is a really good place to start, I think it's of immense value to people, is the concept of what it means to live a spiritual life. And I know we were starting off with this, and you were sharing some wonderful insights about your own path, about what it means to you to be a spiritual person, about the commercialization of certain industry sectors, shall we say, with regards to spirituality. So I think that a lot of people have misconceptions or different ideas about this. So I would like to start with that topic, please, of what it means to you to live a spiritual life. Thank you.
Mm, that's a very important question. Yeah, I think it has changed throughout the years. So I came in, in connection to meditation to start with, which is one of the tools we can adopt to really come in connection with ourselves. But this is my understanding now after 40 years almost of practice. So what I define nowadays as spiritual life is about I'm spiritual because I deeply care. I deeply care about my understanding of my personal suffering, the understanding of other people's suffering. And I'm here to live a life which is as best I can reduce the impact of suffering that I create within my life and within the life of other people. This is for me a spiritual life. Of course, this includes a lot. It includes to understand how is my mind working, how is my body working, uh, what happens when I'm triggered. Am I reactive into certain things that people might say? So while maybe when I was younger, there was always that somehow probably not clear wish to understand the liberation from suffering. So the journey that I'm now somehow walking is about understanding the causes of why the mind, why I or humans do make certain choices, and can I make choices that are reducing the suffering, impacting the suffering. So from the Dharma perspective, which is the framework that I use myself to understand and unpack the human condition, it's about what are the patterns that create and perpetuate suffering, really, so that I can reduce that. And also having that awareness, that discernment that life, human life on this planet is messy. And I can, the best I can be very aware of many things, and yet I walk on the grass and I will kill some ants. So is in that context of living a human life, harming others might be quite unavoidable, but I can be present enough to reduce that impact. So this is what I consider a spiritual life. And it means then to look beyond the patterns, the conditioning, the cultural conditioning, the societal conditioning, and having some guidelines about what is called moral, which is a word that we have somehow erased from our, vocabulary almost, because it's belonging maybe to religions and things like that. But what I'm somehow following are some guidelines that help me to be on this planet and have the most nourishing impact that I could have as a human being. This is for me a spiritual life. And of course, to that, we need awareness. And this is the foundation, and this is what meditation for me is a platform where I can practice awareness. And when there is awareness, I can make different choices in regards to food, in regards to how I move from A to B, how I nourish my body, how I treat myself when I'm ill. So, and how I'm showing up in relationships. So it's not so much, and when I was younger, probably I followed, the meditation path, maybe in search of alternative state of awareness, which I see now a bit in people that are starting to practice. And there is, with all respect of the use of, psychedelic and all that, it's so much about the experience in itself that you have during the meditation or during, but the reality is that once you have these experiences, what do you do with that? And how do you live your life? Again, how you show up in the relationships that are, confrontational with my parents or with my partner and brothers, sisters, and the person that I meet at the post office. So how do I show up in life once that I have this foundation, which is called meditation and awareness? So this is for me a spiritual life. And if you are just practicing for the sake of practicing and you're not taking these experiences off the cushion into life, that's not enough. And that has been a discovering, along the decades, that I was practicing a lot of meditation, but yet I would meet my mother and I would have very difficult conversations, and I was not resourced somehow. And so that, as you said, I was an artist before, and I use dance as a way, somehow very unconsciously, probably now that I'm older, I understand that choice. But how can I be connected to myself, to the body? And this is still present, although I use then different tools, and I'm now helping people to find their way back to themselves and to have access to resources that are within our system. I still use those some tools from the dance background, but it was always about awareness. It was always about understanding human suffering. It was always about understanding why a human being moves in a certain way and not another way. So that was my interest as a choreographer, in fact. And now that I'm not working in that field at all since more than a decade, I'm basically using those resources to really help people to get in connection to themselves. So that's, sorry, it was a long answer to your question.
Beautiful answer, though. A beautiful answer, very eloquent, very clear, and it makes a lot of sense. I really feel, first of all, that will clarify what it really means to be spiritual. And I was actually listening in a type of awe there, Teresa, because I feel exactly the same way about it. So I feel that really mirrors my own search and my own reasons for doing a lot of this, by the way, in a way that I'm not used to hearing every day. So I was just actually taking that in. But to follow up with what you were saying there as well, and you said about taking the practices off the cushion and into day-to-day life and these different exchanges that you've had. I would also like to go into that topic a little bit as well, because when you're teaching people and helping people with the interventions and with the different methodology, I would like to go into a little bit more elaboration of what that actually means so that people can find out of it first of all. And then I think that will naturally lead into ways that people can help themselves or ways that people can discover methods of suffering a little bit less. Because, as I said to you before we started recording, there is an epidemic now of these kinds of issues, especially with mental health. A human life has always been fraught with suffering, as you mentioned, but I think in the modern world it's taken perhaps a different form. So we will come to that, but starting with the first phase of that, can you share with us a little bit more about what you do in terms of the interventions, how you teach, and a little bit more about what that means? Because I find the whole process fascinating and it's of such immense value that people need to hear about it. So let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I do professionally is so entangled into my personal search as well for the liberation from my personal human condition or human suffering. So yeah, I was an artist, and then but I was practicing meditation since I was 18, maybe 20. So when I was a very dedicated practitioner, I started with transcendental meditation, which is about transcending the reality somehow. And there are some valuable technique in this. And I was also practicing the siddhas, which are specific qualities that we bring to life when we have touched into the unified field, let's say, this place of open, spacious awareness. And then we bring to life certain qualities like compassion and bliss and friendliness. And but then I was meeting somehow, as I said, some personal issues about, relationships, and so I came closer to Buddhism as a, and I do not consider myself a Buddhist in a sense, although I study the Dharma and the understanding of human suffering. But there is at a certain point, I also decided to do this profession because my body, because it was aging, because of certain condition that I'm not going to explore here, but there was a hindrance to continue my path as I was at this point of, until this point of my life. And so I decided to dive deeper into how can I apply these practices to, to help myself and help other people to deal with chronic pain, to deal with issues in relationships, to deal with, the confusion that we meet in this world. And so I dived more into the academic applications or the clinical application of mindfulness. First of all, with the mindful-based stress reduction program. So this is all the construct that John Kabat-Zinn has created, and is a great contribution to humanity because he made these practices accessible into hospitals, into places where maybe people would never practice. And his contribution has been immense because he created what is called secular mindfulness. I don't personally, use this term. I don't like it in a sense that it's not secular, it's just inclusive and it's beyond the religion, it's beyond what we might practice or profess as a religion. For me, these practices is about understanding, things that are essential. These are patterns that all humans, beyond race and culture, we are all confronting to that. And as you said, there is an epidemic of mental health. Well, the specifics might be different because we have social media, because we have probably a platform, social media is just a platform where things are just emphasized and underlined and, magnified. But the patterns are always the same. And it's simply that, that conflict, that friction that we create because we want something and we don't want something else. And this is the pattern that is at the base of human suffering. So whatever that, what I don't want is, it can be, physical pain, it can be, grief, and whatever we as human are confronted with is unavoidable. How we can reduce that grip and that friction so that we can give more space. So the practice is about creating that spaciousness where the grief, the separation, whatever we experience as humans can have less impact on our centeredness, our well-being. So it doesn't mean that this thing that we don't want is not there anymore. It's just that our awareness is more inclusive and we can allow that experience without being so dominated by. This is the liberation from suffering. And this is very different from maybe a normal understanding of a liberation from suffering, where there is the absence. That will never happen. It's just like waking up to that reality that the body is decaying, that people around us will die anyway, that we will experience loss, because where there is love, there is loss. And so how we can navigate life with some resources where whatever it happens, I can offer a wide spaciousness to allow all that. And that takes a lot of courage, of course, because there is no repression, there is no, numbness, and there is no all those kind of coping mechanisms that we adopt as humans to not face the difficulties. The journey we propose is just how can I be present without clinging to a different outcome? And that's easier said than done.
Absolutely. That is a wonderful, once again, Teresa, beautiful description. And I must say as well, by the way, in your case, it really shows the practices. As I said to you before, I mean this as a compliment just from my heart. It's not really a question. I'm sitting with you now, and I feel like we've met before. I feel totally comfortable to get into these different topics, and you exude that warmth and that kindness and that welcoming feeling. And you do get that with people who've sincerely practiced for many years as well. And it doesn't mean that I'm saying anybody is perfect, but as you're saying, they're learning to give yourself that inner space and ride the waves of the feelings and some of these things. And I would like to go deeper into that as a topic because one of the things now, when we're talking about the education, that has a sort of heart and head. It has both. It has the logic and it has. This question is very heart centered. But when you sit with people who are developed spiritual practitioners of many years, I've found a strange phenomena that you can learn just from sitting with them, and as obviously you can learn from talking with them and learning from them. That's of tremendous important with the mind. But I'm talking about learning with the heart now as well. And I feel that feeling with you. So I feel that we're sitting together and I feel that the lovely energy coming back and forth and continuing to open my heart. And, that's a process I'm going through. And I suppose the question here, although this isn't something I had planned, but I would like to delve a little bit deeper into that process of transformation. So you were saying earlier that, things would irritate you, or you'd have these conversations with your mother, or you'd meet someone in the post office, or there would be those triggers. And I would like to go deeper on a personal level, not to probe into anything personal about you, not anything you're not comfortable saying, but just the illustration of some of how that process has been for you and how you've changed. I'm sorry this is a big question, but I also feel this will relate to the mind body connection as well during your time as a dancer, because that's also very valuable. So, if that makes sense where I'm going with this one, I know it's quite a broad topic. I would like to delve a little bit deeper into that because simply because I'm sitting with you and I'm just feeling it and I'm feeling it and it's lovely. So I would like to delve a little bit deeper into that development process, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a wide question, and I hope I'll be able to get at the core of it. I believe, yes, the connection with the body is essential. And what we do, especially as contemporary humans, because we have such a developed cognitive capacity. When I did the master at Bangor in your home country, Zamal, and then I was giving some courses. So what I study specifically is mindful-based cognitive therapy, which is a program for depression to reduce depression relapse.
Mm.
And I noticed that, so I was working with PhD students basically, and the level and the incidence of depression within this population is very high because the more we are intellectually trained, the more we try to rationalize our pain. And there where we get, caught into the rumination, the absence of the body within this process is crucial to maintain somehow the depression. So the first step is about acknowledging what's happening in my body when I am confronted with a situation that is difficult. I feel my body tensing to start with. And the gift of mindfulness or meditation, however you want to call it, the practice of awareness is that allows a pause and again this spaciousness between, this is what we typically say, and I've been trained to say that, respond rather than react. And it's a big concept. But in that space between, the trigger and how I react or I respond to that, this is where liberation and freedom lies. Because freedom is, the understanding of freedom, and you have, this kind of, I'm sorry if I might sound very judgmental, this kind of generation that want to do what they want. Well, that's not what freedom is. The only freedom is that you have a choice within also the condition where you are, where you can be in prison. So, it's about, even in the most difficult conditions, how do you respond to that in a way that is not harmful to yourself and others? Because when you are not aware of that, so you receive, someone tells something to you and you respond out of your protective mode. And so this conversation will turn in something that's very difficult. It will become a discussion that has probably implication. If is this within your relationship, you might divorce at the end of the time, at the end of many years. And but of course, when you are in relationship with another person, it takes two for tango, and that has to be also the wish and somehow the perspective of the other person. Are we here together to somehow understand our wounding and healing our wounding? If there is not that perspective from both person, then I better leave it, somehow, okay, I cannot continue, harming myself. But when I meet myself, for example, self-criticism is a typical, I help a lot people. And I have now this new sentence, moving from self-criticism to self-coaching. Because self-critic is something that we have developed along the time to maybe protect ourselves from suffering, and the mind is there to try to protect ourselves from suffering. Is a good intention but a very unwise effort. So we have to bring that, you separate the intention and how you do that. And when the wounds are not healed, that's where then other intervention come into place. I will be reactive. I will always meet someone and myself in a very protective mode where vulnerability is not possible. So, of course, now we are, very familiar with Brené Brown and, vulnerability being the source of all what is nourishing, compassion, and so on. Yes, indeed, because in the moment I'm vulnerable to my discomfort, to my suffering, really, or pain, to start with, not suffering, to my pain, is there where I can choose how am I handling this situation. If it is a physical illness, if it is a person that is triggering a wound in me. And it's, we all have a baggage as humans. We all have been, nowadays also the word trauma is very, almost is tribal. Everybody talks about trauma. The reality is that we all experience something where we have closed and contract ourselves. And this is a coping mechanism. And it's okay for 1, 2, 3 days. It's not skillful when that becomes the way I'm living the rest of my life and the rest of the decades of my life. So I'm never in the present moment, really, but I'm always walking front with my back turned to the future. I'm always looking what happened to me, and this is the way I live my life. So there is no space for transformation. So going back to your question, how transformation is possible, is noticing that that has happened to me, but it's not dominating my life.
Mm.
So I developed myself into a trauma supportive person. So I learned trauma release exercises. So as a tool. But again, part of that is the mindfulness. And what the practice offers us is a possibility to meet myself in that place where there are no wounds. And there is and so when I meet people, that are, there is the normal term that they are broken people. They are not broken. They have just somehow forgotten about this place, they have lost the access to it. And some people are, of course, further out from that place than others, maybe. And they experience maybe more intensity of pain and discomfort. But how can we somehow gently make more space and remove so that I can have access to that part of me, which is wise and compassionate and has a capacity to live despite the difficulties with a certain, centeredness. I don't know if it's a long question and it's a long answer as well, but I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, very much, very, very much. I mean, I could tell that you were thinking there, have you covered everything? And I'm sorry for asking a big question and putting you on the spot, but it's so powerful because, first of all, from my side as well, in terms of the mind and body connection and some of the things you were saying there at the beginning, that's so important because a lot of my audience as well, there's a lot of athletes, professional athletes who follow my work, and of those 400 plus interviews, quite a few of them are athletes. So first of all, on a very simple level, I am glad you mentioned that because I feel people will be very, very interested to understand that a little bit deeper. But even there, what you were saying about transforming the suffering and the space for these experiences, that one in particular for people who are beginning the journey of mindfulness more. I was thinking of it more from that space because, as I said, the self awareness from my side, this is not really a question, I'm just saying for you, has many implications. So, for example, when you were saying earlier about depression or about people having certain triggers, anxiety, a lot of times, and having experienced that myself, by the way, a lot of times it is a very strong emotional response, and I've been able to stop a lot of it by giving that gap or by stopping the stress response that seemed to then bring me down to that level. But then it has other implications as well, because, for example, when I interview people who have transformed from troubled backgrounds, people who've been in prison or people who've been in very bad situations like that, I speak to them and I say, okay, look, you did something. How long was it between the thought of, say, feeling angry or feeling whatever it was, feeling offended, feeling attacked, and you were saying about the protective the concept, to the physical manifestation of that, which then causes somebody else harm, but also causes that person a lot of harm and lands them in a very bad situation. And they'll always say, well, it's virtually no time at all. It's a second, it's a few seconds. In terms of crimes of passion I'm talking about now. If it's something more calculated, it's different. But even so, I found that more calculated, people selling drugs or doing something bad like that, still comes from an unconscious place. It still comes from a lack of awareness of a perception that that will end their suffering when it actually causes more for them and for other people. So I'm not really asking that as a question of you. I'm giving that the context as to why I was asking. But it does lead into something else that I feel is very, very important here because this naturally leads into how we can take the responsibility to live in a more compassionate and more empathetic world. Now, when we look at the world today, there's not necessarily a lot of empathy at the kind of the high levels. I mean, we're looking at a lot of wars, and I think a lot of world leaders are operating from a very unconscious place, but that's another story. But on our sort of ground level as day-to-day life, there is a lot of compassion in the world, but there could be more. Now, I'm not putting you on the spot here to answer all of the world's problems at once, but I would like to go a little bit deeper into specifically into compassion here, which is very, very important. And as I've said, you have a very compassionate energy of what people can do to increase their presence with other people? Because so far we've been talking about topics that have more of an inwards focus of being aware of my responses, my triggers, and of course that's where it starts before we go outward. But particularly in increasing empathy and increasing mutual understanding and increasing our awareness and our presence, non-judgmental presence of others. I would like to go a little bit deeper into that because I feel that today people have it. They don't use it because they're rushing around and they're, under pressure in their lives and they have other problems that naturally take them away from it. So, particularly within that context, how can they bring themselves back to
Yeah.
giving other people that non-judgmental presence, if that makes sense? And I'm sorry, it's a long question again.
Thank you, Liam. I think there is, first of all, a language
Mm,
problem here. Also, what compassion is to start with. I'm drawing here from the studies of Christine Neff and some psychologists that have used compassion as a tool to bring balance in the life of people. So I'm really, there are references I'm talking to now. And so empathy and compassion is not the same thing. And compassion implies that we are proactive to change or to alleviate suffering. This is the understanding of compassion. And of course, for that, first you need to notice that someone or yourself are in a difficult moment. And there is, again, where vulnerability is necessary, because otherwise you are not noticing and not knowing what's really happening. So there is a component of presence and mindfulness, so to speak. I notice that there is something. And then it's about engaging in an active way to alleviate the suffering, and mine or the one of others, in case in case of self-compassion, is my own suffering. But there are some pitfalls or some misunderstanding, because some people have been educated that and understand that taking care of themselves is selfish, so there it's difficult to be self-compassionate, and they are just there in service of others. But this is a trauma response, because when I have somehow an attachment, somehow this function that I will be loved only when I'm in service of others, only when I do this, this, and this. Well, you're loved because you're alive, period, So, and that becomes a difficult dynamic. So it's not compassion for others, it's people pleasing. So we enter there in a different dynamic. Then there is the misunderstanding that if you are self-compassionate or you're compassionate, you're weak. And so if you are in a corporate world, now there is a lot of, this wave of people that are trying to bring, compassionate leadership. And there are a lot of people working in that direction. But you know what? It's not easy, because to be a compassionate leader, it means to listen. It means to say, I did something that is wrong. It takes a lot of responsibility and accountability. But when you have a very strong self-critic inside of yourself, you cannot say, I did something wrong, because then you're shattered, So again, it requires an inner work. As I said, it's quite complex, and I'm sorry I'm going in that direction. How can we be in another idea can be that I don't have time to be compassionate. Well, let's start from very basic things. Do I wake up and turn on the phone right away? And do I bring my brain into a state that is not constructed for, So there are studies, where they notice if a person, the first thing the person does goes into the phone, where we are prone to be unfocused, to be distracted. And so, it's impossible to notice anything. How do I make choices based? When do I go to sleep? How do I live my life? So compassion is very, I would say, quite basic. And it's not just about, okay, taking a bath and putting candles. For sure, it's part of it. But sometimes, there is also a distinction of, fierce compassion, where we also pause and just, maybe if there is an injustice, we voice that.
mm,
It's a broader context. It's not just people pleasing and saying yes. Sometimes compassion is to say no, because this person needs to learn, because this person needs to take responsibility for his unskillful or her unskillful, behaviors. So it's again, it's difficult to navigate, and there again, the mindfulness, the presence of noticing which patterns are acting now. How is this dynamic created, right? Am I a people pleaser and I want to be loved? Am I generous so I make this person, in charge of giving me something in return? So it requires a lot of authenticity and really the understanding of the conditioning of everything. And so the practice, there is that what is called the practice is not just concentration where you just see that, like I see my hand and I don't see the things around. If I take my hand, I can still see the surrounding, in the picture there in the computer. And this is what is required is just an awareness which is inclusive and is, yes, focused, but also flexible to see the other things that are happening around. So I don't know if that helps. So
Very
compassion is a quite complex as well dynamic.
it is complex, but the thing is, Teresa, you have so much to share that I mean, to get to all of it, we would have to do like a multiple of. So I understand that, and today we only focus on a few topics, and we only have the time to condense that down into sort of an hour or so. So I understand that we're only scratching the surface, but as I said earlier, with the whole self-awareness and this concept, it just affects so many people that even though it is basic, I mean, even what you said there of being loved because of an achievement or because of a certain status or whatever, versus being able to receive love just for being. I mean, it took me years to learn that. I mean, years and years to learn it. That was one of my biggest challenges. And even now, I'm only still coming to grips with that, which then, not to go off topic here, but feel the need to mention it. Then that naturally relates to what you said there about sometimes compassion is actually saying no. And I feel that now I can be more sort of selectively compassionate. And it doesn't mean compassionate and then sort of mean or cruel or anything either. But sometimes, people are pushing me for something, and years ago I would have said, yes, sure, we'll do that. Now I say, well, no, actually, you need to make a change in your life, or you need to do this, and something back to them. So I think a lot of people struggle with that. I think that's also an epidemic concept of a sort of conditional self-love versus an unconditional, and that's of immense value as well, because I can feel that obviously you've grown through a lot of the self-criticism concept yourself. I get that vibe, and I mean that as a compliment. It's wonderful. I'm growing through it. I'm not there yet, but a lot of people are going through that. And the other thing I've noticed as well, when you said about the corporate world, is a lot of our social construct of success, or what it means to be successful, by the way, seems to be driven by that concept. So if there's a question in here, I suppose the question is now, after so many years of doing this and helping so many people and having achieved a lot of success yourself, by the way, obviously in different fields, I would like to go a little bit deeper into the definition of that, because personally, the thing that inspired me to follow a Buddhist path, although like you, I don't limit myself to that, was actually the fact that, having worked with a lot of successful people and famous people and all of this stuff, I noticed that it was not really a distinction of whether they were self-aware, whether they were happy. The only happy ones were those really being of service to people, because a lot of times it's like the old adage of somebody who's very wealthy, but they never feel that they have enough money. So people look at it and they think, okay, well, wouldn't it be wonderful to be like a millionaire or something? And having met a lot of them, I look at it and I think, well, not really, because for a lot of those people, they constantly have the fear that I need to make more money. Somebody's going to take my place. Somebody's going to do better than me today. So for a lot of them, they have that so-called success, but they don't really have peace. And a while ago, I stopped looking at happiness, and I thought, well, okay, no, we'll just look at peace, because happiness is always up and down anyway. Or maybe we'll look at joy. And so, having worked with people for so long and having guided them, even when you said earlier about the PhD students and the depression and things, and I wondered if how much of that, for some people, not for everybody, comes from the drive to be successful, where it may not be authentic for that person. It may come from trauma, it may come from something they're compensating for. Usually, in my experience, a lot of it is that, or something somebody told them they should be, that they don't actually want to be. So the old thing of, parents saying, well, you need to be a doctor or a lawyer, where they might want to be something completely different. So I'd like to go deeper into your definitions of what it means to be successful, and it goes way beyond anything materialistic. I'm not talking about that. I'd like to cut through some of the society standards of that and talk about what it really means in your view to lead a successful life. Does that make sense? Because I feel that this is also a super valuable topic for people as well, and it's something I feel very drawn to talk about.
Thank you. So I have to go a couple of steps back because I lived until a few weeks ago. I lived and worked in a meditation center or whatever, in a retreat center. And we had a team of professionals, including counselors. And it was quite unique because we were using mindfulness without any religious connotation, and we had a clinical perspective of that. And it was a place where people, for example, with burnout,
Mm.
people that probably would never somehow approach meditation or one of these approaches or intervention, they would never, because there were people working in corporation, working in banks or whatever, with a different foundation in life, but they were, literally on their knees. And so I work with many people that were active in this so-called, successful world. So they had, wealth, and they had, maybe sometime a good family life, if, divorce was not, somehow coming in between because of their burnout, because of their life, always searching for more and more money and more this and more that. But what we have lost along the path. So the base for well-being is, of course, physical health, and then is, of course, financial health, and a good family, a good, support system. But then we have a fourth pillar, which is meaning and purpose. And again, I go back to the body. When I feel expansion, this is what gives me value and meaning and value. If I feel contraction, so I do that, so I feel better about myself. Better than what? So what is at the base of that behavior? What are the patterns at work? Again, what I do myself, we were sharing that before. I do not consider myself a therapist, because in the contemporary world, the therapist is somehow the same thing as a pill. I take the pill so I'll be better. But what we need is to understand what are the patterns at work that create that dynamic. If it is a physical, illness, if it is burnout, if it is whatever it is. And I see that, when you don't have meaning and purpose, there is no enough money, there is not enough whatever. There is no expansion in whatever you do, and you need always more. And in Buddhism, this is called the hungry ghost, which is at the base, of course, of addiction, which is the craving for instant gratification. And so there, physiologically, we have to make a distinction: what creates, produces dopamine, and what produces oxytocin and serotonin. Because that happening, that I rarely use the word happiness, because in our understanding, happiness is this, this shoot of dopamine, but it's temporary, it has a short, you know, time, a few seconds, a few minutes, and then I'm back to my misery and I need more again. So, and the pause is what is my unmet need here? Maybe it's my need to contribute, or is my need for nourishment, is my need for respect. And you mentioned, conditional, unconditional love. In this 3D kind of dimension where we live, well, I would say unconditional is almost impossible, because we need to be respected. We need to, that our needs are honored. We need many things. So there is for sure a place where unconditional has a place, and there is, a context where respect is needed, connection is needed, collaboration is needed, belonging is needed. And in our contemporary society, where we have lost somehow some references, human beings are very, refer to themselves, and it's very difficult to navigate life in this way. Therefore, also depression is so, there is an epidemic of depression, because it's just like, there is a lack of values and the sense of belonging to something. If there is a cause, or there is, a group of like-minded people, and we are hardwired for that. And when that is missing, then we're disbalanced. I don't know if that makes sense. So,
Makes sense.
yeah.
Sense, absolutely. I feel that these concepts are changing, and a lot of times they've been lost. I mean, even something very simple, actually, but very profound, like what you said there about happiness. I mean, these days, a lot of people focus on happiness as a type of fun or as a type of escape or something along those lines, rather than as an actual happiness. And again, in my own Buddhist journey, that was a big part of it, because I remember meeting monks and meeting these kinds of people and thinking, wow, technically, from our society perspective, they have no money, they have no relationships, they don't really have a title as such, but they're the happiest people I've ever met. Now, I know that my understanding has deepened a lot since then, but I remember in the beginning thinking, wow, like, how is that possible? And again, what you said there really illustrates the profundity of that. Now, as we come towards the latter phase of this, because I have to go shortly, I would also like to give a mention to how people can connect with you, because I'm looking at this today. We've talked for sort of coming up on an hour. It's a good amount of time for people to be able to learn from you without being overwhelmed, because you have so much to share, especially because you put across things in a beautiful way that challenges fundamental views that people may have about their lives. But I mean that as a compliment. I don't mean challenges in a bad way. I mean getting people to think and feel twice about the way they're living. So because of that, people will need a degree of sensitivity to take that on board, especially if they're new on the journey. So we don't want to overwhelm them today. I'm thinking, my mind's going now quite fast, because I'm thinking actually we should probably do another talk after today as well, and talk about some other subjects, because there's so many things. But in the meantime, if people would like to connect with you directly and find out more about all of these things we've been talking about today, the way that you teach, the way that as I said, I'm not sure how you define it, because, okay, not being a therapist, not being a counselor. So let's just say the way that you help and contribute to people. If people would like to find out more about that, what would they need to do to reach out to you, or what is the way that you feel most comfortable being connected with, for people to find out more about your work?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So my joy and my value, and I live, for me, living a meaningful life is really to be in service of others, and making all this understanding, this knowledge, this personal journey as a platform for other people to get their way back into balance. So I was working until recently in an institution. So I just came out, and I am in a phase of transition since a few weeks. I still don't have an home page, and there's a conscious choice. I'm not very much on Instagram, actually, never. I have an Instagram account, but I don't post anything. I'm going to work soon for a couple of clinics here in Portugal where I live, but I do work online, and the tool that I have discovered what I'm using by now. So as I was working in this center where people were coming, also in second rehab phase. So after coming out, from addictions, um, or other things that were also in a process of grief, for example, because of the divorce, because of someone, that was not there in their life anymore, the kids, the husband, whatever. But what I noticed, especially in people that were dealing, that were in the rehab phase, after addictions, is that whatever they consume, whatever they use, which is also work, to regulate their nervous system, is like crutches. And when you take the crutches away, their nervous system was so dysregulated. And that was my quest. How can I help? And even the meditation practice was impossible because they were, overreactive and overstimulated. So, and that was and then I started to study why is so. So I focus now on a tool which is, including the mindfulness, including the grounding, being feeling grounded, finding a safe place within themselves. So I use the methodology, which is first of all creating balance in the nervous system. And it's called trauma release exercise theory. And then, of course, I include more in that. And I use that as a starting point. Because that is when we are not vulnerable again, when we are constantly frozen in a state of numbness, nothing is possible. It's just nothing comes in. And that is a coping mechanism that we use just to not feel, because what we would feel would be sadness and anger and all that. And for example, anger, there is such a social construct around anger. And anger is the birthplace, if it's channeled and used in a very skillful way, is action. If there is injustice, I pause, I feel, I accept the fact that there is, injustice there, that I'm, touched by that. And how can I act not out of aggression, but out of being in service of justice, or justice for myself is not, in a global context, justice for myself. So, but that, it requires permeability, the permeability of the heart. And that's what is stopped because the nervous system comes and we are in a frozen state for decades sometime. This, of course, with incredible consequences on our system, the immune system and the digestive system and so on. So it has, of course, implications also on our health, the immune system, so we get easily sick. So this is what I start there. I believe this is the foundation. Before we start practicing meditation, many people do not practice really meditation. They practice disassociation because this is their pattern, that this is their familiar pattern. The annihilation of the self. If you lived in a family context where you were neglected, of course the annihilation of the self is what you know. It's what is familiar to you, and you continue practicing that. So you need a lot of understanding about the human nature. And, as I work with people, yes, humans are very complex, but also very predictable. That's good news, because there are patterns that we use. So whenever we are feeling overwhelmed, either we shut down, either we run, either we fight. So these are the three main somehow coping mechanisms that we adopt. And so it's just about addressing that and how can we make the system again vulnerable, melting the ice of the frozen and act in a way that is compassionate, that is listening to, is honoring our feelings, and from there start a journey. So the first thing that I would do if I meet a person is to see what is the nervous system of this person. Is this regulated? Is this dysregulated? What are the coping mechanisms? How we are, because we all regulate. When we are, overwhelmed, we all regulate. And the question is that a maladaptive way? So is cigarette, is alcohol, is Netflixing, binge eating, and so on? Or is that an adaptive way? So which is walking in nature, being present to yourself, maybe adopting a meditation practice or talking to a therapist, whatever, or using other tools. So a regulated nervous system, I would say, is the base of the journey. This
Wow,
is how I start. Yeah.
that is beautiful. That has such far-reaching implications for the world we live in, for the human condition as a whole, I would say, but especially for the world that we live in now in 2025 and beyond. So I think that is absolutely wonderful, and I'm sure that people will reach out and connect with you. As I said, Teresa, today it's been incredibly profound. I will be listening back to this, making some notes, by the way, because I've learned some wonderful things from this, ranging from entirely new ideas to sort of clarification on things. And I do these to be of service to others, but I always learn as I go. So I would like to thank you actually for that, by the way, because there's a couple of big questions I had in my own life that you've answered today, maybe without realizing it, but also for the method of service that this will be for other people. I think it's absolutely fantastic because we've covered some very far-reaching topics and some very commonplace issues that people have, but they have a misunderstanding of what to do about them. So I can honestly say that this has exceeded the expectations I had. It's been a lot better than I thought. I knew it would be good, by the way, but it's been a lot better than I thought. And I wasn't sure until right up until we started talking how much I was going to sort of focus on your story more personally or more on the bigger picture. And those are connected. Those are very connected things. But today I feel it's gone in a wonderful direction of the bigger picture of the knowledge and the wisdom and the practice that you've developed that will help so many people just by listening to it. So I thank you so much, so much for that, Teresa. It's been an absolute joy. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.